Hello YouTube, welcome to part 2 of my bumper build. I'm going to go over kind of what I'm doing real quick, and then we're going to get into the actual fabrication of the bumper. I didn't really go over it in part 1 and I wanted to go over it in part 2 to give everybody an idea of what I'm doing. Again, don't take my advice too seriously because I'm not a professional welder and I have no experience or training. So this is me learning. As far as things I'm going to be using, straight edge. This is an older one. You'll see why later. I've got a speed square. You probably don't need both, but these are both very handy to have around anyway. Paint marker. This is great for writing on metal. You'll need clamps to hold things for cutting and maybe welding. Measuring tape. That's just to measure everything, by the way, and get good angles. If you don't have an angle grinder, I thought about it, you could probably use a wire brush like this to do some of the cleanup, or you could do it even by hand if you really wanted. You also need an angle grinder. This guy. As far as my thoughts on an angle grinder, get whatever. Get one from Harbor Freight, get a cheapie, because I bought this thing 15 years ago for like 20 bucks and it has never let me down. I've never felt like I needed more power. I don't use it that often, but when I do need it, it's there, and it's a very handy tool to have. So just get something cheap or borrow one. But you'll want some flap disc. These are almost like sandpaper put onto this disc. And some grinding disc. Think of the grinding disc as like a low grit sandpaper, and the flap disc is a high grit. This one is a lot more aggressive, and if you're going for a smooth finish, you can't do it. But if you're grinding down a large weld, say, this is great. And also, I do recommend getting one of the name brands on this. I tried the Harbor Freight stuff, and it didn't work well, and it wasn't even that much cheaper anyway. For cutting, you'll probably want cutting and grinding. You'll probably want hearing protection as well as eye protection. Don't lose your eyesight. Don't lose your hearing doing stuff like this. For general fun, a big old hammer is going to be nice to whack things into place when they're not quite where you want them to be. And then as far as cutting the metal, I tried a couple things you probably saw in the first video. I tried originally a cutting disc on this angle grinder, which was my original plan, and it not only was slow, but it was sloppy, and the cuts weren't very good, and it was loud, and just not the way to do it. I have cut, and I can cut still with this grinder, but it's just not a good finish product. The other thing I tried was a metal blade on my jigsaw, which did work, and I actually preferred that, but it was very, very slow, and I used a good bit of cutting oil as I was cutting. I then did some digging and was recommended that you can actually get metal cutoff wheels for a circular saw. So I went to my local store and bought one. I'm not going to say the brand of this one, but you can probably tell by the color anyway. These did not work very well. It said it was for ferrous metal, so steel, and it just didn't work well. It wasn't a good product. It was getting red hot. It did cut the steel, but it wasn't going to last doing what I did. So I went out and bought a dedicated metal cutting circular saw. These have a larger guard over a standard circular saw. They spin at a lower RPM, and they've actually got a smaller disc. But this works great. This is probably the best thing I've had to cut metal. This is unreal how easily it cuts. I've cut with an oxyacetylene torch before, and I would say this is about as fast. And I haven't had the pleasure of trying with the plasma cutter. I probably think that'd be the best option. But not only is that a really expensive thing, but you need a lot of gas and electric and everything else. You need 220 and air and gas, one of the two, for that. So I don't have that. If you don't want to buy a dedicated metal cutting circular saw, I actually picked this up too. This is a conversion for a circular saw. So you just slap this in a regular 7 1/4 circular saw and off you go. So that's nice. I don't have experience with this, but I've heard good things on this. This one's about 50 bucks, 30, 50 bucks, something like that. This one is like $1.50, so is what it is. Of course, you'll need a welding mask. The when you weld, you're actually putting major UV light, radiation, infrared, everything out, whole visible spectrum. I've heard of people getting sunburned while welding. So wear a mask, wear thick gloves, and wear a thick, I don't have a dedicated welding jacket, but I was wearing my coveralls. If you're gonna be sitting there for half an hour straight welding, you've got to have the right gear on. And then as far as the welder, I'll show you on the handheld because I don't want to pick it up. It's kind of heavy. So I do have a fan going while welding as well, and I'm in an open area, just open on the garage. So I figured ventilation is good, but that's another key factor here. This welder that I have is a little Hobart MIG. Is a Hobart flux core only model. What I liked about this model is you just set the depth of the metal. There's no speed or amp adjustment. I actually didn't buy this. I traded it for a shotgun, and I don't know if I got ripped off or not. So let me know in the comments. Again, this is a name brand welder. It's interesting beyond the fact that it's flux core only, so there's no gas needed. It runs on a 110 outlet, but this is the feed of wire, and then this is the clamping mechanism. And if you notice, there's an extra clamp there, and it's kind of sketchy, but this mechanism actually failed, so I have to actually clamp it down. I did that. I think you can replace that mechanism, but looking online, that mechanism looks awful similar to a certain Harbor Freight flux core only welder that probably cost way less than this thing originally. So I can't really fully recommend this product. That said, it has been welding 3/16 steel, and I feel like it does as good as a job as I'm able to do, so maybe it's not so bad. Let's start fabricating. So YouTube, I've actually done a lot of this already. We're looking at the bumper upside down currently, and I have come to realize that I don't have this end piece right here. So I'm going to show you start to finish everything I need to do. I don't even have a template for this one, but I don't think I need one. Honestly, the template method was nice to get started, but once I kind of started moving here, I don't know how much it actually helped. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is measure from this corner here to this corner here. I cut this piece here at 1.5, and it's still showing at exactly 1.5, which is great news for me. Then I'm going to measure from here to here. And that's going to measure 6 inches. That's actually the first time I've been able to say that in my life, so that feels good. And then we're going to measure up here. We're just going to go 1 inch up because I want it to actually be angled down. And then we're going to, this bit here, we're going to leave a little bit of a gap. I'm only able to eyeball it, and so I think I'll cut probably 1/4 inch off the top so it's not perfectly straight because it needs to come in somewhere it's angled in. Let's transfer it over to the steel. I'm trying to minimize waste, so I'm having a lot of weird angles here from the weird angles that I'm making in here. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take my speed square, just mark it at 1.5 inches, which will be there. Then I'm going to go 6 inches in, mark my end point. On this reference, I can actually just draw a line up to 1. By the way, this paint marker is great. I was using a gray Sharpie before, and this works a lot better. Then I'm going to take a straight edge. You can use anything you want. I don't want to write on that speed square, so I'm using this rusty old one. And I'm going to make a reference line there. Perfect. And then if you recall when we made it, I actually don't want it perfectly straight. I want it to go in about 1/4 inch. So actually I want to make a line there. Then we're going to move on to going ahead and cutting it. I'm using this little metal saw. It's a dedicated metal saw with a metal blade on it. I actually saw some conversions too. I'll talk about this later. Anyways, we'll go ahead and cut this.
Thought about trying to catch that just now, but I realized I wasn't comfortable putting it. But if there's a bigger piece, I would try to hold one end of this as I was cutting. But there's our piece. Let's go test fit it. So, test fit. A little bit of a, no, that works. Pretty happy with that. I'm going to bevel this edge. You could use a angle grinder in a vise, or put this in a vise and then use an angle grinder that you probably already have. Or if you have a bench grinder, that'd be a little bit easier. I'm lucky enough to have a bench grinder, so I'm going to use that now. Let's make some sparks. So there we go, it's beveled on. It's not, doesn't have to be 100% flush, but the closer you can get it to 100% flush, the easier time you'll have welding and the better weld it'll be. But I'm pretty happy with this actually. From there, we'll go ahead and tack weld it. You actually saw me do some tack welding on the last video. I didn't really go into detail onto what I was doing, but that's what this video is for. So for tack welding, it's basically just putting it in place before we do a full weld to make sure we're happy with how it looks. We just do a little tack, do a little tack, do a little tack. Make sure when you weld, you wear a mask, gloves, and covering. Ideally a leather welding jacket or any sort of thick covering, because it will throw sparks and it does get hot. So let's set that up. From there, if you're happy with how it looks, and I'd say I am, we can go ahead and do the full weld. I've actually been welding the inside and outside. I don't know if that's honestly 100% necessary, but it certainly makes it feel a lot stronger. This supposedly can weld 3/16 steel, so we'll find out. Now when welding, you will be putting in a lot of heat into this steel, and if you don't believe me how hot it is, I'd say it's pretty hot right now. Quick way to make tea though. With this piece cooled down a little, I've gone ahead and brushed some of the pieces off. I'm going to go ahead and grind down this weld. That isn't necessary really. I just think it looks better. It'll make it look like one continuous piece of metal instead of a bunch of pieces welded together. Although with me, this being my first welding project of anything close to large, the fact is it's probably going to look more like a mirror that's been taped back together, but I'll take it. And that will be our completed process. I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to flap disc the entire piece down to get rid of a lot of the ugly things and so make everything uniform and prep it for paint. So I think I want to stop the video here. I'm pretty happy with it right now, but stay tuned for part 3. We're going to paint it, get it on the car, and do some finishing touches, and I can't wait to try this out. I'm actually really excited for it. Thanks for watching.